Welcome to today's episode of the Cross Labs podcast, On My Mind.
All right, well, Lisa's actually here this week, so we could have that discussion that we've been putting off for like a month.
No, the Lisa therapy session about how do you make meaning and goals in an inherently meaningless world.
Yeah, like what makes for a good goal? How do you actually create meaning yourself? All need is gone, post-scarcity society, nothing bad's going to happen to you if you do nothing. How do you decide what to do? Oh, also, nothing you do matters also. Like, no one needs you to do anything either. That's kind of important.
I have one question. So I am assuming that we already had the discussion of why having meaning or purpose it's important, because I think all those scenarios are based on, okay, we have to have a meaning or something like that. But do we?
Well, you could go the nihilistic route. I don't think it necessarily is going to be a choice you'll enjoy, but, who knows?
Nope. Can't recommend it. But it is a choice that you can make.
I mean, like, if we put it in the context of training AIs or making AI life agents or something like that, those are the agents that just sit there and do nothing.
No, I was just thinking about the idea you just mentioned about someone wanting to preserve a language that's only spoken by 60 people. In some sense, in that case in particular, it's even though we're saying there's maybe no necessity or needs, it's the fact that people die sort of automatically makes the thing rare or scarce, and people I think like things that are rare or scarce.
If there aren't that many people who know the language and you learn it and you teach it to other people and teach it to your kids, then you could single-handedly save that language from ceasing in that particular period of time. So it may feel like there's a lot of empowerment, or that you have a lot of agency basically over something that would normally be bigger than yourself. Because if I was really annoyed at some linguistic shift in English.
Yeah, the one thing is there's a certain amount of trust in that kind of situation where I think post-scarcity sounds very nice, but it's also, I think it could be a kind of anxiety-inducing situation where, how is this kind of situation, I'll say infinitely or for a long time stable? And I would almost have this desire to figure out how can I continue this state through, whatever small contributions I could.
Does the consequence of that philosophy mean that in some sense you get turned around to want there to always be some form of instability?
Yeah, it's almost, to kind of use the example of, let's say you have a language that, only 60 people know or whatever. And in some ways is the idea to, teach one's friends or children, how can one be certain that, the language just wouldn't be able to kind of self-sustain itself? Is it a myth kind of that, kind of N+1 person is going to be what's really crucial to the continuation of that language?
A decade or so ago, I went to Dominica, and there's a local language there that has basically been shrinking. People grew up in a generation where the language was spoken more, and now they see there are fewer people who can speak it. And so they've opened up schools and things to teach that language. So since you can see it shrinking, kind of over-optimistic to say, oh, it won't die out if we don't do anything, I think. There's something presented by the environment that might be undesirable.
We're in a kind of, I'll say, global kind of post-scarcity environment, but within that environment, there are kind of local things that are becoming more scarce through, let's say, kind of lack of practice, like with a language or just other types of skills. And so our individual actions can kind of push back against that kind of local scarcity.
I guess my view of it is it's less from desperation and more from the feeling that you could do something. You have the ability to reach out and change the world in some way. One philosophy would be that those opportunities to have actions matter at a scale bigger than yourself, they're sort of rewarding.
It definitely seems like there's a difference between a need in terms of I need to eat food, I need to breathe air. I almost said breathe water and drink air. And then the needs of, for example, I need to go play the piano. So I'm kind of wondering, in a world where there's no scarcity, I mean, can we even really construct a world such that every need is met?
I guess this is my answer against the nihilism perspective, is that we do have the ability to construct for ourselves values, and it can take the form of constructing a need. So we can take it in the sense of fearing the consequence of failing to meet it, or we could construct it in the positive sense of seeking the consequence of managing to meet it. I think that the actual process by which we construct those values or those needs is, it's quite hard to just one day decide the value of my life is going to be that all of the objects in my house are sorted according to size. And then not just to say it, but to actually like feel that, right? To really feel satisfied when all of the objects in your house are sorted according to size.
I'm not sure I would agree with that reasoning. Because for me, I would explain it rather in terms of habituation. Because if your brain does the same thing repeatedly, at some point, the reward you get for doing the thing gets lower and lower. And so at some point, you're naturally going to get bored.
But I guess the tricky thing is the perception of what constitutes the same. Because like one level of abstraction would say programming a game like Space Simulator is basically the same thing as programming a 2D fighting game is basically the same thing as programming an MMO. They're all programming, whereas you could also view those things as actually being quite different.
That's it for this week's episode of the Cross Labs podcast On My Mind. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you'll be the first to know when the next episode is out. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.